Now, back to The Exchange with Matt Gurney on Global News Radio 640 Toronto.
11:33. Glad you're here with me today. Every once in a while, you will have a chance to hear, a little music here on the show. Now, we don't use a ton of music coming in and out of our breaks, but when we do, it'll almost be a little bit of classic rock, just because that's my thing. I have a real weakness for classic rock stories, and I have a love of local history as well, which is why this one really appealed to me. There is going to be an auction coming up in Boston, relating to a piece of rock and roll history with a real local flavor. Let me tell you briefly the story, and then I'll welcome my guest here to the program. On May 3rd, 1969, legendary U.S. rocker and guitar god Jimi Hendrix arrived at Toronto Pearson for a concert. He was playing a show at the Gardens, Maple Leaf Gardens, that night. The problem was customs agents discovered heroin and hashish in his luggage. He was arrested, booked, but released on $10,000 bail so he could make his performance, and was actually taken to the concert at Maple Leaf Gardens by police because they had to get him there in a hurry. Now, ultimately, he was found not guilty because the jury concluded that it was possible he was not aware that the drugs were in his luggage, that it was possible that it was a member of his touring group as well, or even a gift from a well-meaning fan. It was 8 hours of deliberations on that front. The verdict coming out on December 8th, 1969. Pardon me, that's when the trial was, and when the verdict eventually came out, Mr. Hendrix commented, "Canada has given me the best Christmas present I ever had." Bobby Livingston joins me here now. He's the Executive Vice President at R&R Auction. Bobby, you guys recently came into a piece of history here. What is it you have in your possession that relates to this story in rock and roll history and also Toronto history?
Well, we have the actual arrest card where Jimi Hendrix was asked to put his fingerprints upon it. So there's 10 individual fingerprints, but I think what's most amazing is they also had him do both hands, almost full. You can see almost those famous fingers that played those guitars and those incredible riffs. There's Jimi Hendrix's fingerprints that you can just imagine those touching those guitar strings. And then up in the left-hand corner, he had to sign it. So Hendrix had a beautiful signature, and I don't know if you have it on your website, but it's just such a flourish that anybody who hasn't seen his signature really ought to see it, because it just tells his personality. You can see it in how he writes. So this, like you said, is an amazing artifact from when he came to Toronto, and it survives to this day. It's spectacular.
And it's so rare as well, because you guys working in the auction business will know, obviously, there's that the twisted joke, Bobby, I'm sure you've heard them before, that the moment any celebrity passes away, their autographs go absolutely through the roof in value here. But this is not just an autograph. I mean, how often do you come into possession of a full set of fingerprints of a celebrity?
It's interesting. They do appear. I mean, they're rare, very rare. But we've had other fingerprints of celebrities come to market, because celebrities seem in their youth to get themselves arrested. You know, from Frank Sinatra and others, we've had items related to their arrests. So these things, you know, they get tossed out, or however they get into public hands, they do. You know, so they're rare, but we do sell other types of fingerprint cards and things.
And how typically do you come across these things? I mean, it's you'll hear sometimes of a guitar Hendrix might have used somewhere, right? Where someone who was backstage at the show had the guitar and it changed hands a few times, and eventually it comes to you. But there's only one of these cards out there, and you would think it would be locked away in some dusty drawer at a Canadian customs office, but somehow you guys got your hands on it. So I don't know if you can tell me the specific story of this one, but in general, how did these things come out to you?
Well, we know that this sold originally around 2006, because there was a mugshot attached to it that was sold separately, and that went for over $14,000. So we won't know how this actually has been in the public hands, but it has for over a decade at least, if not more. And then, things get what they call deaccessioned or tossed out. And, because we've been holding auctions for 40 years and specialize in this type of material, collectors will send these things to us to sell for them. The current owner bought this at a public sale a few years ago on eBay. So it's just one of those treasures. It's one of those treasures, that people are constantly looking for rare items, and then they give them to auction houses like us to sell for them.
Well, what do you think, Bobby? I mean, obviously the goal here is to raise a few bucks, but in general, based on what you guys have seen before and based on, interest in Jimi Hendrix and also in these kinds of items here, I mean, what would an item like this go for?
Well, the comparable is that mugshot taken in Toronto, and that sold for nearly $15,000. And I think this fingerprint card is actually cooler and probably will exceed that price. So we have an estimate of $15,000 on it. But like I said, those are his magical fingers right there on that card, and it could go for a lot more. We'll see. It's
incredible, Bobby, because I'm thinking exactly the same way you are. Speaking with Bobby Livingston, Executive VP at R&R Auction, where who have come into possession of this Jimi Hendrix arrest card from when he was busted at Pearson with heroin when he flew into Toronto to play a show at the Gardens back in '69. It's incredible to me, Bobby, just to think. I mean, a mugshot. I'm not saying there's no value in that. I totally get it. I understand why a collector might want that. But Jimi Hendrix in 1969 put his fingers into that ink, put them on the card, and then how many hours later, those same fingers were holding a pick as he was rocking out in front of the city of Toronto. That's incredible to think about. It's tactile in a way a photograph is not.
That's right. And like you said, the police drove him to the concert, and he played, and then our research told us that when he played his song Red House, one of his famous blues numbers, he kind of changed the lyrics, just for Toronto, that's something about him being in jail. As soon as I get out of jail, I want to see her, So it was on his top of his mind that night he played in Toronto, and I'm sure it's a legendary concert for people up in Ontario that probably still remember it. And if any of you have photographs of that night or ran into Jimi Hendrix, we'd love to hear from you.
Absolutely.
These things have, increased in value, and he's such an icon of the 20th century. It's amazing, we're talking 50 years on. And the other thing about Jimi Hendrix that is interesting, his career was very, very short.
Absolutely.
He was only a public figure, maybe from 1966 to 1970. That's it. So anything autographed by him, he was a generous signer, so we get them, but he's just extremely rare and desirable.
Absolutely. Bobby, obviously we're going to follow up on this. We'll see how the auction goes for you, but thanks so much for making some time for me this morning.
Yeah, it's great to talk to you.
Good to talk with you. Bobby Livingston, Executive VP at R&R Auction. The auction to be held in Boston, Massachusetts, where this Jimi Hendrix arrest card is. I bet some of you out there might remember when Jimmy came to town. If you got any stories about that, ping me at matt@640toronto.com, because I love hearing stories like this. You might not have been able to go to the show, but I bet you regretted not going to it after, especially because, as Bobby said, Hendrix had such a short career. I mean, just when you thought that guy would have probably decades ahead of him, only 4 years from shooting to stardom to when he unfortunately died. And if you know how he died, you won't be surprised to find out he had heroin in his luggage. We're going to come back in a couple minutes. We got lots more still to come here on The Exchange right now. Let's check your drive.